Okay, I think we can get this show on the road. Very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody who's joining us. Welcome to this this event. My name is Niamh Hanafin. I'm Senior Advisor for Information Integrity at the Global Policy Centre for Governance, which is Oslo Governance Centre's new title for those of you who are not aware. So we're here today to launch a new resource, an internal reference manual that's really targeting UNDP practitioners. We are really hoping that this is the beginning of a longer socialization of this document, just to ensure that it has the uptake and usage that we're hoping it will receive, and that it's a useful resource for those of you who are working in this space. So a little bit of context, the launch today is part of a 4-part series on the 2024 Super Year of Elections, which has been organized by the Governance Community of Practice in collaboration with us at the Global Policy Centre and the Global Governance team, especially the Democratic Institutions and Processes team. So the objective of the series overall is to really build a shared understanding of UNDP's integrated governance support to elections and explore potential areas of assistance like civic awareness, electoral inclusivity, voter registration, information integrity, technology, etc. We're really happy to be able to co-host this with the Governance Community of Practice. Unfortunately, Ezgi is not able to join us today, so I will be hosting. So we are going to run through the manual itself. We're going to have an overview of what you can expect when you start to flick through the document. The link will be shared with you if it's not already in the chat. And then we're going to give the floor to 3 of our electoral specialists in the room, just to get their perspectives on how this has been, some of these approaches have been applied in the areas that they cover. So, but before we do that, I want to hand over to Julia Kirscher, who's our team lead for governance and research innovation at the Policy Centre, for a few opening words, and then we'll move on to the panel. Over to you, Julia.
Thanks so much, Niamh, and welcome, colleagues, to this launch event. We're really happy to have you with us. And thank you, Niamh and Zana, for allowing me to set the scene from the global perspective a little bit before we hear more from our colleagues. Yes, you've said it. 2024 is the super election year. We all know this by now, and it's actually roughly half of the adult population in the world that will have a chance to vote, which is far more than ever before in one year, which is quite incredible. But our information ecosystems are more fragile than ever, as I think we can even feel personally. The issue of information pollution is increasingly concerning electoral contexts. We've seen that even in mainstream media. The rise of emerging technologies such as generative AI is exacerbating the problem, of course, and the impact is not insignificant. When electoral processes and institutions are delegitimized, it really erodes public trust, casts doubt on results, and enables divisive actors to gain traction. And again, we've seen this even in anecdotal evidence across all regions, actually. At the same time as these threats are emerging and evolving, we see that key institutions such as electoral management bodies and media regulatory bodies often do not have the skills, the technologies, and the capacities to deal with these challenges. And as the UN system's most active provider of electoral assistance, us as UNDP were naturally concerned about the impacts of information pollution on the electoral institutions and the processes we support ourselves. So the center, our Global Policy Centre for Governance, has been at the forefront of addressing information integrity since 2020, providing guidance and supporting programming in actually over 30 countries. And we're delighted to launch this important manual today, which is a result of the excellent collaboration with the team working on democratic institutions and processes. And we want to demonstrate our commitment to tackling this thorny issue in a coherent and collaborative way. I think the manual is a testament to that. As you will see, the manual provides a compendium of existing practices that spotlights UNDP's approach towards strengthening information integrity in elections. And we see it as a key reference tool, actually, for UNDP and our partners to identify appropriate and effective interventions to prevent or mitigate the impact of information pollution during elections. Apart from the work with the team on democratic institutions and processes, I also want to highlight the excellent collaboration and thank numerous colleagues across various UNDP teams. And that includes the Chief Digital Office, the Gender Team, the Human Rights and Rule of Law Team, the Youth Team, the Accelerator Labs, and many others who contributed to this manual becoming what it is. And special thanks to the regional hubs for supporting us with the regional consultations we had. Clearly, we welcome any feedback on the document. We're putting it out there so it can be used, and we'd love to know how useful it is and what we can improve. And we really look forward to seeing how it's applied in different contexts and UNDP country programs. So I'll leave it at that and hand over back to you, Niamh. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. I will pass over now to Zana Idrisi, our Information Integrity Specialist at the Global Policy Centre, and she is going to walk you through the main components of the manual and what you can expect as you start to use it. Excellent, that looks good.
Great, sorry for this. Technology sometimes fails you. Great. So as I said, we'll start right with the reference manual and its content. So as you can see, the reference manual is divided into 3 main chapters. So you have program planning considerations, you have programmatic approaches, tools, and then tools, resources, and partnerships. And the last part of this reference manual is annexes, which is quite important as it said already. The reference manual, it does provide this compendium, this list of the projects and existing initiatives already implemented. So everything around all the country examples that we have identified, they are already located in the annexes. The time frame and data sources for this reference manual has been from 2020 to 2023, and this is done because we see this evolving information integrity system, and we wanted to ensure currency for the reference manual. The data was sourced online from UNDP and other intergovernmental and non-governmental organizations, and was enhanced through consultations with UNDP country offices, regional hubs, and other thematic experts. So the first chapter of this report is the program planning and considerations. So it starts with before designing any programmatic options, it's very important to assess the information ecosystem. And there are some program planning considerations that are highlighted here in the reference manual. The electoral program, in which it does describes the framework when engaging on information integrity within the electoral assistance. I think Aleida and Dan has really described very well in our last COP mission, in our last COP session on the NEM missions, and how you identify what are some how do you identify the initiatives within the electoral assistance. So working during that, so everything need to be guided from UN framework for electoral assistance. Identifying entry points, so it's very important to know legal, social, and political factors. We do have the strategic guidance that provides a framework on how do you identify what are the enablers and drivers of information pollution and their impact on electoral processes and democratic processes. Time frame, so the electoral period versus a long-term period, and in here, electoral periods, the initiatives within the electoral periods do achieve their objectives successfully. However, not all the time they do allow for sustainability. So this reference manual really calls for longer-term electoral cycle or aligning your initiatives with broader governance programming. Use of digital tools before deploying any digital tools is important to examine the rationale around it, the cost, the applicability, sustainability, but also adhere to UNDP digital standards. The gender consideration, we know information pollution, it does impact the different gender differently. So having gender disintegrated data, in-depth analysis on the intersection of gender dynamics and disinformation, it's also very, very important and something to consider when designing programmatic options. Championing young people, again, involving young people in designing, implementing, and monitoring interventions, also a key consideration here. The monitoring and evaluation, this one has faced a little bit of challenges. It is different from other developing initiatives, and this happens because you do have this evolving ecosystem all the time, different stakeholders, political sensitivities, and also there is challenge to measure the impact of, for example, on public resilience. However, there's been some effort from UNDP. There is already an M&E framework on the impact of digital tools, and that can guide you in terms of how do you measure impact on similar initiatives. Here, the third chapter, and I think the most important chapter here is the programmatic approaches. We have outlined 5 broad programmatic approaches that come as a result from what has already been implemented within UNDP. As you can see here, each programmatic approach in the report, it does provide detailed description of what it is, what are the objectives, which stakeholders to include, what are some of the risks and considerations, and also what are some of the key indicators that you can use to measure the impact. Here you see very broad, but each of them have actually subcategories. For example, for media and online content monitoring, you have initiatives within this programmatic approach, such as social media analysis, media monitoring of gender-based technology violence, and similar with other initiatives as well. So for the multi-stakeholder engagement, we have the coalition building at national level, but you also have the code of conduct as some of the initiatives within this programmatic approach. I also want to highlight that each programmatic approach, they also have case studies that we have identified as best practices, and you can see how they were already implemented, what were some of the impact and results from case studies that we have identified. I wanted to show here, wanted to show how they are laid out in the report, and each programmatic approach is also very much color-coded with the initiatives. So you see the monitoring of the tech-facilitated gender-based violence. So this belongs to the first programmatic approach on social media content analysis. So for this, you see the objectives, what it is. It starts with describing what it is, objectives, primary beneficiaries, interventions, both long-term and short-term, and their impact, some of the risks and limitations, and then impact measurements and some of the key indicators you can consider when implementing an initiative like this one. And then in the end, you have the examples of UNDP implementation. So it takes you right to the annexes, and you can see all the country offices that have already implemented. Similar with fact-checking, this one, it does belong to the public resilience programmatic approach, but you can see the layout is pretty much similar to all the programmatic approaches. You can see what are the objectives, what are risks, risks and limitations and indicators, and then again, you can see the annexes as well. For this one, we do have additional resources like the project here, Select, for the Knowledge Hub from the project Select. And the last chapter of the reference manual is the UNDP tools and resources. So UNDP has developed a set of tools, resources that aim to support country offices on implementing and starting initiatives on information integrity. So we do have Digital Kit for Democracy, and here we have iVerify and eMonitor. I'm not gonna spend much time here because we do have another session, a COP session on only the 2 tools and their implementation. But in the reference manual, you can see this, you can see infographics around both 2 tools that really explains what are they used for, how they can be deployed, who to involve when you deploy them. So you can see both programmatic features and technical features quite extensively in the report. And I think it's just really worth mentioning that they can be, and we do mention in the reference manual as well, that the iVerify Monitor and the Digital Kit for Democracy can be either deployed individually or can be deployed as a package as well. Another resource that highlights best practices is the Sustaining Peace Union Electoral Processes, the project that is already being implemented by UNDP Brussels. They do have the Knowledge Hub with quite extensive resources on information integrity and analysis on how it impacts, how information pollution impacts democratic processes. And the last one is the accelerated labs. As you know, they are embedded in UNDP country offices. They can be used as a resource to deploy new solutions, local partnerships, and kind of just test the solutions around information integrity. And the last part of the report, again, is the annexes. I think it's really important, and we really wanted to highlight this part because, as we said, it's a list, a compendium of all the projects, and in the annexes you can see quite an extensive one where you see different projects that were implemented by country offices. This is just one example. So you see fact-checking and debunking and where it was implemented. You have the links, and you, in order to see what were some of the success and just to the project's development. And for some of them, you also have the country focal point if you want to reach out for more information. But for each programmatic approach, so you have an access for all of them. I think this is in a nutshell. Sorry for the tech issue, but if we do encourage everyone to engage with it, and if there is any information or question, please do reach out to either Niamh or myself. Thanks, Niamh, and over to you.
Thanks so much, Sana. And as you can see, we've really tried to make this a user-friendly resource. Something that you can pick up and dive into certain aspects of areas of your that you want to explore in your programming. So I think from that sense, we really aimed to ensure that it was designed and laid out in a way that facilitated that, and also just to highlight that these are all programmatic initiatives that have been implemented within our own organization. So we're really drawing on, this is not necessarily new knowledge, we're really just bringing together these pieces in a coherent way and organizing them and structuring them in a way that will help us as we sort of think about our objectives, what problems we're trying to solve, and then what our potential options are to address those. So with that said, I am going to hand over now to our panel of experts in the room. We have with us Luis Martinez Betanzos, who's the Senior Electoral Advisor for BPPS. We have Nadia Hashim, who's the Regional Electoral Specialist in the Regional Hub for Arab States in Amman. And we have Lenka Homolkova, who's the Chief Technical Advisor in UNDP Liberia. So each of these advisors, specialists are kind of observing this issue from different geographical locations, different roles. So we're really interested to hear from you all in terms of what you're seeing in the places where you're engaging in electoral context. What are the problems and how do they look like? And then maybe just provide some sort of examples of where you see these programmatic options in the manual being applied in those areas that you cover, and what your recommendations would be for country offices or others looking to apply some of these program options. So let me maybe hand over, Luis, to you first to take the floor.
Thank you, Niamh. Hi, colleagues. So as Niamh mentioned, I'm going to go to three very practical examples in Latin America. I'm based in the Panama Hub, serving the country offices in Latin America and the Caribbean. So I will mention the examples in Uruguay, in Peru, and Argentina. The first one is in Uruguay, and we will put the link in the chat because it's not in the manual, but I thought it was interesting to mention because it's about a pact that it was signed in the National Congress by all political parties. It was a pact against disinformation. And I think it's interesting for us as practitioners because we're very much used to support the code of conducts, especially among candidates and political parties during campaigns. So we're used to put around the table these stakeholders. But in this particular case of Uruguay, it was signed to the highest levels, from the President of the Republic, the President of the Congress, and all the political party leaderships present in the Congress, together with the press associations of the country, journalists and press associations together. And it's interesting because it tackles this issue, disinformation. It was signed in 2019. Now we have elections again in Uruguay, and hopefully will be revamped and modernized. But it was a success because it allowed to have a large conversation among the relevant stakeholders who have to fight disinformation. In this case, traditional press, who do fact-checking through this exercise, and as well political parties, because obviously this information comes from many different parties around electoral processes. But some of the more active stakeholders disinforming the public are political parties and candidates, as we saw in many elections. And in this case, it forced the discussion. It forced a very public agreement that it was monitored by journalists themselves. So again, I think this is for us as practitioners a very easy initiative for us to have in our countries. In this case, our office in the country played the role of convener of the different parties. Journalists and political parties and leaderships are not necessarily very aligned in what they do. There are, in fact, always huge fights, as you know. But in this case, in Uruguay, it proved to be very relevant, and hopefully will be revamped and re-signed for the elections this year. So you have the link. Please take a look. You will see plenty of discussions around the making of this initiative and the launch and so forth. So that's one. A pact against disinformation with different stakeholders in Uruguay signed to the highest level. In Peru, we have another initiative called Amayuya. Amayuya is in Quechua language that means do not lie. So this initiative is about fact-checking. And fact-checking, it was an agreement between 25 different outlets and civil society organizations in Peru. They have a reach of 5 million readers and radio listeners. And the idea here was to share their capacities of these 25 outlets, who are mostly working in rural areas using local languages to do fact-checking. The good thing is obviously the resources are limited. This initiative, what it brings is that together with UNDP country offices, again, is that these outlets, they receive some training on how to do fact-checking. And then these outlets, they were doing fact-checking of dubious news. Then one of them, when that fact check was clarified, it was false, it was true, then it was shared with the other 24 members, and the reach, it was obviously great. So it was an enhance of training and capacity learning from all these media outlets with our support from our country offices and our electoral project. And the dissemination, it was obviously great. Obviously, it gives a lot of credibility to these radios who are very much operated in rural areas, and which is an initiative that started as well 3 years ago and is still ongoing with a huge success. Now it's managed by Ojo Público, which is a civil society organization that as well had reached agreements with with 3 electoral management bodies to share this information. They moved from fact-checking to use of social listening through eMonitor Plus, which is one of the tools that Sana mentioned, using artificial intelligence, what gives this organization to higher reach to do social listening, analyzing big data, and again, this data analysis shared with the EMBs and other stakeholders in the countries. The same thing as in Uruguay. The launch of this initiative allows many partners to get together to a table and try to understand, what is this information, and how impacts and what we can do from the different angles that we operate. So it's another interesting initiative where our office was heavily involved that allowed many different partners to associate, learn from each other, support in this fight against disinformation. It's still operative. In Argentina, this is a very interesting initiative as well. The name is Con Vos, what means translated will be with you, or we are with you. And Con Vos is interesting because, again, our office is behind this, and this is initiative from the private sector, from the business sector, together with local government and UNDP, civil society organizations. And the initiative is, and you will see it as well in the link we're sharing with you, again, in rural areas, is to try to fight against the digital divide, digital literacy that is in the manual highlighted as one of the issues to fight disinformation. We need to have we have to work on this area. In this case of Argentina, Con Vos, what they do is they have around 800 points where in bodegas are like small family-owned shops. They train these shopkeepers. We're talking about hundreds of them. They train them in digital access to information or public services, e-governance. And then the citizens can go to these family-owned shops, very small shops, and these people is trained, and then they can help customers when they go there to access to information or access to public services through e-governance. People who are in rural areas who maybe don't have internet, and elderly, but not only elderly, the digital divide, as you know, goes beyond age. So that's a very interesting initiative because on political process and elections, it plays a role, the access to information. It benefits these private little shops because they have customers entering into the shop. So it's a very interesting initiative that I recommend you to take a look. There are very nice videos, so you will see how this operates in Argentina. I think what I wanted to do is give you a flash. This manual that you have now is a huge, there are tons of aspects in the annex of initiatives that Sana mentioned. So go to these annexes, go to different initiatives, see how they fit in the area that you are working, taking pieces from one of the others. Maybe you can create something interesting where you operate that we can learn from. And I think I will leave it there because I think I'm using 8 minutes. But then I will say that please read the manual. We electoral experts are not experts on fighting disinformation. We are learning as we go. This manual is another initiative that will have to be revisited very fast as soon as we have feedback from you and your initiatives. Use the excuse of the manual to sit with many stakeholders where you operate that they know much more than we do on this information. And use the resources we have, meaning Sana, Niv, Osama, and others who are on this call. Back to you, Niv.
Thank you, Luis. And I think some really great and diverse examples from that region. And certainly there was a lot of very rich programming happening across that region when we were doing our mapping. So really great to highlight the kind of range and diversity and depth of that programming. Great. Let me hand it over straight away to Nadia, who is over the Arab States region. So looking at a very different part of the world. Over to you, Nadia.
Thank you very much. Hello, colleagues. Lovely to be here. Congratulations to those of you who made this launch possible and all the information that's come together. And as Luis said, it's quite a handy resource because it is a new area of assistance for us. So any examples will be quite valuable, and they are valuable. So do look at it. In my intervention today, I'm going to look at it from the women's political participation perspective. So why gender matters. I think we know, all of us, that gender disinformation and misinformation and all else in what we call around online violence, it does hinder women's participation. It spreads false narratives, hate speech, and other forms of violence. And we know what this looks like. There are definitions around the different tactics that are happening. And it does impact public perceptions of women in general, women leaders, women in public roles overall. It really prevents women's participation. And we see it in the out-of-state region in particular, because this is where our focus is. Me and my team, it's 80% of women MPs here reporting that they face some sort of violence and harassment online. Of course, you know that this is not a phenomenon to the Arab region. Globally, we see similar findings. IPU, similar, 81% of women MPs globally face violence, and a large portion of that is psychological violence online. So the information integrity space presents specific challenges to women and women's participation. Another statistic, according to the EU Media Agency, 1 in 10 women in the EU have faced some sort of cyber harassment from the age of 15. So the problem is there. And unfortunately, given the pervasiveness of the problem, it's becoming accepted and normalized. The more we speak to women leaders across different regions, they say, yeah, of course this will happen, and it is happening. But it actually is preventing women from taking part, but it's broader than just that. It does affect political and economic spaces. It silences women online. It diminishes their engagement in public space, in democratic processes, of course, in their leadership roles, as I mentioned, but it's also health. There are a lot of issues around depression, anxiety, trauma that's caused by harassment online. And sometimes we see this going to the extreme levels. Of course, as we're talking today about integrity, information integrity, it affects overall the state of democracy, affects political rights, the work that women leaders do, and citizens' trust overall. And then societally, of course, reinforces patriarchal norms, structures. And I will tell you the experience in our region on this, and I think part of it speaks to parts of the manual that talk about the need to be sensitive to gender information, disinformation, and why this is such an important area of focus. So I think that manual is quite timely. We really cannot waste time in addressing this problem. We really have to act now, and we know that having this gender disaggregated data, that some of the tools allow us, the tools that are mentioned in the manual are critical when it comes to advancing women's participation in elections, especially today. Now, this guide provides, I think, very good entry points for us to do that. And I will give you the examples of the Arab states, and I'll do it both at the national and regional level, because we do programming on this regionally as well as at the national level. So regionally, we have an organization called Arab EMBs, and they are the coming together of electoral management bodies. And we've worked with them for the past several years on prioritizing information integrity. And for us, the carrot really has been the eMonitor Plus tool, because they're excited about technologies. So the entry point was a technology, but as we found out very quickly, their understanding of the concepts and of the problem was very different from ours. And here I want to highlight what the manual talks about, doing sort of the analysis, both the social political analysis of the issue in your specific contexts, because in our region, media is heavily already regulated. And when we talk with EMBs are independent, but they are still part of the national structure. And that sometimes can be taken in terms of regulating and maybe hampering free speech in the online spaces. So for that, it really was an extremely sensitive area of assistance. And there was a lot of capacity building and understanding around the sensitivities and the do no harm approach to working and using these technologies. So that for us was an important first step that we realized very quickly when we engaged with this institution and this organization to try and help them to understand what are the best practices of using them and what are the negative aspects of using these tools. What they have done is to prioritize eMonitor as an entry point to working on women's participation, but more specifically on tackling online violence against women. And I'll give one example of Libya where they have done this. Libya is a member of this regional organization. And when they found out about the tool, and also the good work that the Libya office does there. And a big pillar of our national project on elections there is on women's participation. So they really tapped on eMonitor Plus as a way to boost what they're doing there. And the idea really was to collect data, to understand the problem through collecting data and using AI. And here there were some really good practices that Libya put in place. For example, it's really important to know who is collecting the data, who is analyzing, who is actually defining what is hate speech, misinformation, disinformation. You know, these terms are relatively new, and you may see different terminologies depending on which resource you read. So there's also not a global consensus on the terminology. So there was a lot of learning first to be done in Libya for all of the stakeholders, and they brought civil societies and women's groups and politicians to define what are some of the key terms when they talk about online violence. But then in the methodology, they had to make sure that they include data collectors from the different segments of the society, because divisions are quite strong in Libya, as you know. So they had to make sure that there were no biases affecting, or at least, of course, we all have biases, but it needed to be neutralized through specific measures. So I think that's an important element to keep in mind. You must consider sort of the intersectionality of this type of work and of the collectors, the human collectors, and also the algorithms. So Libya, I think in that sense, did put a couple of good practices in place that are also talked about in this manual, which is making sure that they had sort of a cross-sectoral agreement on what are the terminologies in the online space, and then on ensuring that they put in place some measures to mitigate the divisions in the society. And all of that, I think, was really a learning process, because Libya, for them, this was a pilot. And I think this is another way to approach your intervention. Really, it should be piloting of the process, because as we know and we heard today, it is a new area of assistance for you, for us, globally. So there needs to be a continuous evolution of what we're doing. And then finally, I will talk about Jordan and the League of Arab States. League of Arab States is sort of the regional body that works, and it has a department on elections. They're quite bureaucratic and quite limited in their capacity of actually having influence, but they have started to look at the role of civil society and media platforms. And in an upcoming workshop, they're going to engage with these stakeholders. And I think this is another good practice that comes from the guidebook, and it's something that some of the writers of the guidebook who contributed to it gave this to us to implement. So this is a good practice that we received from the guidebook itself, even before it was published, and we're putting it into practice with the League of Arab States, and that is to engage civil society and media platforms as they look at this issue in this region in particular. And then finally, I will mention on Jordan, because there is in the manual the issue of time and time constraints. But sometimes with this area of assistance, we can use time as an opportunity, because elections are, you know, the biggest national event for the country. And we know in an election year, we can't really make a big difference in terms of inclusiveness and women's participation, but there are things we can do in this, the tools, and in this region, we use mainly eMonitor Plus, gives us sort of an entry point to push on the issue of gender disaggregated data and understanding the space on women and online safety. So for Jordan, because we're in an election year and eMonitor is advocated by Arab EMBs as an association, Jordan is a member, we're using that opportunity now to deploy it for monitoring, tracking online violence against women. We can't change anything in this election, but we can use the opportunity to collect data so that after the election, they can develop the policies and measures that are needed, and that they better, and all of us better understand what the landscape looks like. So those are a few of the good practices from the guide that I wanted to share with you. I don't know how many minutes, but I'll stop here. Thank you.
I actually wasn't timing because it was super interesting. Thank you, Najia. So I mean, I think you highlighted a couple of really critical aspects of this work that sort of permeate throughout this manual. The first is this idea of collaboration. I mean, you know, this is such a challenging issue. It has so many different components, aspects to it. There is no one clear institution or body that is mandated often to address these issues. So being able to reach out and bring in a sort of a diverse set of stakeholders to understand the problem is super important, and certainly something that we would encourage regardless of what you're hoping to achieve in this space. Obviously, the challenge of gender disinformation and then all the other aspects of that, of the way that women are targeted online is really critical, because I think our approaches to that are going to be different. You're talking about, you know, in some ways individuals or small groups, but that, you know, these are important groups, they're important individuals or people who occupy important roles in public life, and therefore, you know, the kind of intervention that we would design around these sort of issues may look quite different to, you know, wider sort of public resilience efforts, etc. And then I think just, you know, you've raised eMonitor Plus a couple of times, and I think it's true of both eMonitor Plus and iVerify. They are in and of themselves really useful tools, but they are also actually a really good entry point into a wider intervention or set of programming initiatives to address aspects of this. And certainly, you know, I think anyone who manages these tools or has used them recognizes that as a standalone, they're limited in what they can do. But when as soon as you build a system and a collaborative mechanism around them, they become very powerful. So thank you very much, Nadia. Let me hand over now to Lenka, who is going to give us the perspective of a national election process in Liberia. Liberia went through its elections last year, so I think this is fresh, hot off the press. So please, Lenka, over to you, and happy to hear your experiences in that country.
Thank you very much, and good morning or afternoon to all, depending where you are. Yes, I will give an example from Liberia and a bit maybe more traditional approaches that we identified also in the manual. So let me first go a bit through the challenges that we faced during the elections in relation to misinformation and disinformation. So, of course, late or incomplete information by the electoral institutions and delayed reporting on electoral events caused significant confusion amongst the public, and it left lots of rooms for speculation. It's also a society with low literacy rates, obviously, and there is a little capacity to critically assess the false information by the population. Such information pollution therefore risks undermining the confidence of the electoral stakeholders, and in the development context, it increases the risk of election-related violence or conflict. In addition, in this development context, there is only a limited number of population, and mainly in urban areas, that uses the internet. So we're talking in Liberia about 20% of internet penetration only. So that means that the users are also relatively new to the technology, and they have limited experience dealing with misinformation, especially in the online space. So it's always important to keep in mind the online, offline, and the digital divide in this sense. We are dealing with quick spread of rumors between online and offline spaces that are spread by private social media accounts in the online sphere, and then continue through hearsay in the offline space. And at this moment, it's very difficult to tackle. At the same time, there is a poor quality of journalism, which very often the main issue at hand is how to design programmatic approaches and strategies to tackle misinformation and disinformation in both online and offline spaces, but also to ensure that it's not the media who actually spreads the misinformation, disinformation as well. So I was looking through the manual, and I think I would like to focus on two thematic approaches, programmatic approaches that we used in Liberia. I said they are more traditional. So the first one is the strategic communication programming, which aims to enhance long-term capacity of the electoral management to establish effective communication plans. So our project and also previous electoral assistance has been working with the National Election Commission in designing long-term strategies and action plans. But now the challenge we faced closer to the elections is how to make it operational. Because the communication plan very often is a lot of words, and not everybody in the communication section actually read the lots of words. So now how to operationalize it leading to the elections. So we opted for very short and very targeted action plan, which also included the establishment of the strategy communication team, where UNDP actually got an advisory role. It unfortunately happened very close to the elections, like 1 week before elections, because late implementation is one of the challenges. There has been a lot of reluctance to preempt and proactively communicate. There's various reasons for that, but in Liberia, I think the reason was a concern that the information, if it's there, as they say, too early, it will be used against the electoral management body or against the processes, and it will be tweaked and misused. But as a result of that, there was information vacuum which was created. And if the EMB cannot control the narrative, which is one of the advices that the strategy is provided, if the EMB cannot control the narrative, then of course there is a lot of space for misinformation and disinformation. So the action plan, which was created as part of the strategy, included radio briefings, regular social media posts, weekly information bulletins, election information desk, which also included information on fraud mitigation measures in elections, and was very popular actually. We installed it at the daily press conference centers where every stakeholder came to get election information, and they could get all different information about the elections, including laws, materials, bulletins, brochures. So that was very, very helpful. The strategy also included the management of the website, which was, however, a weaker point. The information was published late, and I think the manual can also serve very well on looking into improving and enhancing the websites. The impact, we had increased communication, especially when the commission moved between the first and second round. This was acknowledged also by the election observers, and the ability of the EMB to promptly respond to challenges and rectify mistakes from the first round, including on communication, contributed actually to much smoother conduct of the runoff. So there was one initiative. Now, very briefly on the second initiative, which deals with multi-stakeholder engagements. We implemented a number of programs in increasing media information literacy, which is again one of the approaches outlined in the manual, to empower media and users to critically assess media information. We implemented jointly with Internews, which was, I think it's one of the good things here, that we could use comparative advantages and develop and deploy more programs than if it was only UNDP. We would have much less resources to do that. To train journalists, increase professionalism of journalists, discuss responsible conflict-sensitive reporting, discuss media code of conduct. At the same time, as part of the civic and voter education strategy and the gender strategy, the responsible media reporting and public information was mainstream in all the engagements, including the conflict prevention dialogues, actually. So it was very good for tackling misinformation in the public and addressing this hearsay, which was coming from different parts of the population. We also established, Liberia had iVerify, but I will not talk about this because there is another session, and I think the Liberian colleagues are invited to that. So, but through iVerify, we also trained on misinformation the media, and we installed a booth in the regions as part of the Youth Summit to raise awareness amongst young people about the dangers of misinformation. So it basically became, the combat of information pollution became part of every stakeholder initiative we had. It was kind of targeted approach of the project to make sure it's mainstream everywhere. The media information literacy in particular is supposed to reduce susceptibility to election-related disinformation. What we practically observed as a result was that the journalists had a bit of self-reflection, especially between the rounds. They admitted that they sometimes went out and spread the false information. And we also could see that sometimes when the information were identified as false, the public figures in particular, when they put them out, they took them down because they didn't want to be seen as kind of lying. So I think the awareness helped a lot. The 3 recommendations I would have, and then I will end there. I think intersectoral collaboration is very critical to ensure effective implementation of communication strategy. It helped us a lot both to apply pressure on the EMB to actually communicate and use the strategy. Liberia established a high-level national steering committee on elections, and the communication and information pollution was high on the agenda on every meeting. But then also like co-creation of the strategy together with stakeholders, including both assistance providers and beneficiaries, is very important to maximize the activities to mitigate and manage information pollution. And then lastly, I think more institutionalized engagement is needed to promote media literacy. Like we had like this one-off series of trainings, but I think engagement with journalist schools to include election-related conflict-sensitive reporting curricula would be a way forward to really have long-term and more lasting impact. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lenka. I think that's a really fascinating case study and a really sort of multi-dimensional approach to the challenge, and really great to hear how information integrity was kind of integrated across all of these different components of your work. That's so fantastic to hear. And that you identified the media and the spread of disinformation in the offline space as well as online as being one of the areas that was going to be really important for that particular context. I think it underscores the value and the critical importance of us understanding the information environment that we are sitting in and trying to address, and what are those kind of key enablers and drivers that we can focus our limited resources on, understanding that they are having an outsized impact on what's happening in that space. There is some guidance in the manual around evaluating your information space, and understanding that this may sometimes need to be done with very limited resources or no resources at all. There is some guidance on how to do this on a kind of a shoestring, and what kind of resources you can draw on in country to help you do that analysis. But it's certainly, we certainly would not recommend any programming take place without that kind of understanding of the context. So, and obviously I think the media sector is plays a particularly complicated role in this issue. They can be both perpetrators and victims and amplifiers and rectifiers of this problem, and they can sometimes play all those roles at the same time. So I think it's really important to understand that often in some very targeted disinformation campaigns, the aim of the game is to reach mainstream media. The aim of the game is to get your information out into those spaces. And so journalists and other media professionals can really be targeted in ways that they may not even understand themselves are happening. So really strengthening the ability and the understanding of this in newsrooms is super important and definitely can't be overlooked. And I think the value of the partnership that you had with Internews, I think that underscores what I would suggest would be, again, a little bit like the sort of multi-stakeholder component of this, a critical piece of our response. I mean, there's things that UNDP does really well, and there are aspects of this problem that other organizations have developed really, really interesting and innovative and effective responses to, and have strong curricula and other resources that we can access. So I think, understanding, and there are in one of the very important annexes, we can't emphasize this enough, the annexes are valuable, a wealth of resources. We just didn't want to have the document to be too long in its main body, but we certainly don't want you to ignore those. There is a section on some of those partnerships that were developed through the different initiatives that we mapped for this exercise as well. So it's interesting to take a look through those, and you can sort of see the diverse kind of range of stakeholders that we can bring into this space to support us. So thank you to all three of our panelists. I think these have been really diverse, but super interesting reflections and very practical case studies of the work that we are promoting through the guide. I'm really happy to open up now for any questions, comments from the floor. I see we have people in the room from some of our key resources like the Accelerator Labs, the Select, etc. So feel free to elaborate on the work that you've been doing as well. Or any other cases, experiences that you have in the field, please feel free to share.
Well, since nobody's speaking, Niamh, maybe can I add something?
Please.
While the people is thinking in their questions or interventions. I think one thing that we don't have to be shy to lead where we are on this topic, because I think many of the people that we work are in need to talk with many other stakeholders who are working in this area, and we as a UNDP, we have an amazing role as conveners. So as conveners, not necessarily as the ones with all the solutions, because they do not exist, but as conveners, we have to take initiatives. So we have to lead in convening some of these stakeholders where we operate. We have to be proactive to innovate. And I think now we have instruments at the global level. Again, we have the Oslo Governance Center, we have our team in BBPS global. We have even resources to work on these places like Latin America with Alvaro, who's in the call. So we do have resources that you can pick up. I think the manual is another step to that. And I think my point is, again, we cannot be shy. This is a huge problem on democratic processes around elections. We have to incorporate this in our electoral projects, and we have to make sure that this topic is discussed among our partners, and then we bring solutions. And we have some solutions. We mentioned the tools. We have these tools, eMonitor, eVerify, who are excellent entry points to open the debate, to look for partnerships and fight. So I think that's my point. Let's not be shy. Let's be conveners. That's one of our main roles. Let's do advocacy. And let's bring some tools that we already have in our toolkit. You can see in the manual, there will be presentations in the upcoming events. So let's fight this information. Back to you, Niamh. Now I see a lot of hands. I see a lot of hands of people who wants to intervene.
Thank you, Luis. I mean, I think I would tend to agree that we have a real strength in terms of where we sit in the electoral support space in that convening role, and certainly we actually the kind of coalition building piece of this features in the manual as a programmatic approach like the others. But in truth, I think the coalition building part of this really is cuts across any of the work that we want to do in this space. And I do think that UNDP is incredibly well positioned to be the convener of those groups, and to really bring in some of the non-traditional, I would say, stakeholders into the room to really understand the way in which, I think information ecosystems look really different depending on where you sit, right? And so really making sure that all those perspectives are properly represented, I think, is one of the real values that we can bring to this. Collectively understanding the problem and developing coordinated, coherent responses. It sounds simple. We know it's not simple. We know it's not easy, but it is a real huge boost to any of the work that we do in this space. And it's an enormously valuable approach to addressing the problem. So very well noted, and a very good point. I don't know if our other speakers have any other thoughts that you guys wanted to share. We have a couple of minutes left, and then we can hand over to Aleda.
Maybe since Luis spoke, I should speak as well.
Definitely.
But what I wanted to say really is what we struggle with is the amount of capacity building that is required alongside these tools. We think, okay, we're going to deploy a tool, and then it takes us 6 months to actually get everybody to understand what this is, what it's for. And people think they're going to automatically get some data and they're going to be able to use it for whatever they're doing currently, but that really isn't the case. So there's a lot of time and capacity invested from the project side to try and get in our case, the EMBs, but any stakeholder that you're working with, to get them to the point where they're ready to utilize that tool in basically an approach that is not harmful to them or to us and is sustainable. I mean, really for us, and we say this in the elections world all the time, technology isn't the solution. And again, the same speech we have to give all the time. But so the point here was really to give the time and space to build capacities on the other side.
Yeah, I think a great point, and definitely something that I think we understand that there are sort of timeframes, very variable timeframes. I think Lenka highlighted in her intervention. They were able to get one component of their work sort of up and active a week before the elections, right? So I think those involved in elections and engaging in that space understand the challenges and the pressures. But I think this is one of the reasons why the longer term and more integrated approach to this is even if a specific election is an entry point for some of these interventions, I think just understanding how to ensure that they are embedded in a longer term program is really important. Yeah, it certainly takes time for people to wrap their head around some of these systems, and I'm sure these systems also evolve and change as well, and with various updates, and so that sort of continuous support and training and is always going to be needed. So it's really important to factor in.
Neve, just a quick thought. This is Julia. And actually, I can't find the the hands up button. So maybe that's one of the reasons why there aren't any. I can't see it on this interface. But just a quick thought in relation to this. Thanks to everyone for the really useful examples, first of all, and then related to the points Nadia made on capacity development, and one point you mentioned, Neve, on shoestring budget. I guess another challenge could also be resources, right? Aside from capacities. And one thing you highlight really nicely, I think, in the manual for each of the tools is the time frame. So what could be working short term, what could be working longer term, but resources may also be another issue. So maybe that's something that we could also gather experiences on, like what requires more investment, right? And what can be done even last minute with perhaps fewer efforts on capacity development and financial resources. So that would be useful to know, perhaps for people who even stumble over this manual late in the process and can't budget for a lot of this. Just another thought from a practical perspective. Thanks.
Yeah, very great, very, very good point, Julia. And I mean, of course, I think budgeting is often the prime concern and decider in a way of what's going to be feasible in the time frame that you have. So that's a great point. Lenka, over to you, and then Eduardo.
Thank you. I also thought, since my colleagues closed, I may say a few words, and especially when Nadia spoke about capacity and resources, I think one thing we need to mention and really emphasize is sustainability, and how to make sure that these interventions actually become the partner driven and not like us driven, because I can see it a lot when it comes to communication and implementation to communication strategy. It's always UNDP, international partners who are pushing this through the AMB. But if we don't, then there is this information vacuum. So I think how to make sure, and I think it goes to online tools as well. I could see, like, iVerify, it was used by the CSO, but like how to make sure that electoral management body actually benefits from this as well, even if it's not their initiatives, and in general the partnerships as well. So how to make sure that it's the beneficiary driven and not our driven. I think that's one of the questions we have to ask. over and over again as well.
Thanks,
Thank
Lenke.
you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've all had a lot of conversations with electoral management bodies over the last 12 months or 18 months, where this issue has been raised, and it feels like, there's been a sort of a gradual shift in terms of just recognizing that this is no longer a problem that can be, it is sort of almost by default become part of the response, because really and truly, it's so challenging for an institution like an EMB to manage its processes in a polluted information system, or in an information ecosystem that is targeting and deliberately trying to potentially delegitimize the work that they're doing, and even themselves as individuals. So I hope that I would like to hope that the window of opportunity is opening in terms of being able to have those conversations and get that buy-in that you're talking about, and kind of integrated as a more kind of permanent response to these issues as the elections go roll out and move on. So great point. Eduardo, please, floor is yours.
Thanks, Neve. Yeah, just a quick, thanks for putting together the offer, and great to hear some examples. I'm here kind of representing the global team of the Accelerator Labs. I mentioned Luis giving some examples that I know the labs have been initiating or participating, like the combos, one in Argentina around digital inclusion. Just mentioning that the labs are there in the offer as an active resource. I chose to open the mic because some of you were mentioning kind of time constraints, resources, and of course the partnership and partnership building. And I think these are areas where the labs kind of hold a particular strength, where they are naturally kind of agile in the way they intervene. Of course, the experimentation nature makes them ideal when there are lack of resource or resource constraints towards prototyping or moving fast. And partnership building is one of the kind of mandates of the labs, and something where they are good at exploring alternative partnerships with civil society, or just new and unusual partners in this space. In particular, in the electoral and information integrity area, I think that what we heard from labs is this strength in building alternative and quick entry points to be able to set up space in working in electoral support as well, or at least alternative entry points. Yeah, so I just wanted to highlight that the labs are there as an active resource, and we hope to hopefully contribute actively this year. And in the long term, we're working with the information integrity team on a more solid kind of learning agenda in this space. So probably you'll hear more about that soon as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Eduardo. Yes, talk to your Accelerator Labs, please. I would say from the outset of the work at the global level, the Accelerator Labs have been a kind of a key point of contact for us at country level, and have been doing some really interesting innovating and partnership building in this space for sure. I think some of the partners that we still engage with in many of our countries were identified through the Accelerator Labs as well. So definitely, really, really great resource available to many, many countries at this point, 90 plus, I believe. So definitely bring them into your conversations on this issue. Okay, so I think I don't see any other hands up. So let me hand over now to Aleda Ferreira, who's our global lead for democratic institutions and processes. She's just going to give a couple of reflections and closing remarks. Over to you, Aleda.
Conversation, but I would say for us in the democratic institutions and process team, this collaboration with Oslo has been key, because what we see is the need from our country offices to know what we were doing and how we were doing, and also the need from our national counterparts. We have approximately 45 to 50 countries where we are working on electoral assistance at the moment, and approximately 35 of those are addressing issues of information integrity in some way. So we have three speakers that have shared some of the examples, but there are many. Some have a more holistic approach. Some are focused on a specific intervention. But it was important for us to address that questions. What can we do? What are the entry points? What experiences out there in one single document, instead of trying to fish for the information, is kind of providing that information for you. And here, connecting to some of the comments that I already have mentioned on the fact that we are learning and the field is evolving. So maybe this guide will need to be revised or in a few years, because the ecosystem is changing. Also, the issue of capacities and competencies, and I mean here from the national counterparts, for the EMBs, the civil society, the media that we are working with, but also of our own electoral practitioners. We are, as we said, we are not media experts, all of us, or electoral information integrity experts, but this is one of the aspects that are key for today, for generating the conditions for inclusive, credible, and peaceful elections. So that building that capacity, and here I think has also been mentioned, this idea of trying to find the solution, the magic solution. There is no magic solution. That's what is very clear. But there are, and for that, what has been very evident is that we need a whole of society approach, something that the guide emphasized, and we need also responses integrating different stakeholders beyond the ones that are traditionally addressed when we work with electoral assistance. So for us, that's also has been something that we wanted to emphasize in this reference manual. And I think it has been said, but I want to also mention is this is part of a long series that we are trying to do to strengthen our knowledge on electoral assistance, our knowledge in democratic institutions and process more broadly, and how that connects to a broader governance offer of UNDP. We are the main implementer of electoral assistance in the UN system, and one of the largest, and I will not say the largest, but one of the largest beyond the UN. And I think we need to in the context we are working, to have kind of a reshift of how we are also approaching the work that we are doing. And I think we, in a sense that is more holistic and more integrated with other areas, because the issues that we are addressing and facing today cannot be solved just with a very technical work with the Electoral Commission. And so I think this is something that also is coming in the next series. So the next one is going to be about these digital tools, kind of going a level deeper on them. And the following one will focus on issues of inclusiveness that has been addressed in a little bit in this session, but focus on issues of youth participation. And so I think I will close here and thank everybody for your participation today and attending, and we will continue to share more information with you.
Thank you very much, Aleida. Thanks to everybody who joined. Please, if you have any feedback, as we said, reach out to myself, reach out to Zana. We're really keen to hear your thoughts. Thanks for attending this launch today, and I am gifting you 10 minutes. Which we will not be using. Okay, thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you.